Welcome back to Poser Destroyer. I thought that this week I would just go over some of the new releases that I've been jamming and give you some of my thoughts on them. So, first, definitely one of my favorites from this batch, which is the new album by Toughness, which is called Black Respite of Oblivion. I'm a huge fan of bands inspired by Finnish death metal legends Demileech. Polish band Toughness do this well, and I adored their 2022 debut, The Prophetic Dawn. This sophomore album has them continue to carve their own path, but the album cover still reminds of their Finnish inspiration, and this is largely because they used frequent Demileech cover artist and collaborator Turkogyi Retenen, who was also responsible for classic covers by Demigod, Depravity, and others. The bass playing on this is especially exceptional, with some beautiful leads that sound inspired by Spanish guitar and flamenco. One song has a long growled intro that reminds me of when Antti does this live just because he knows it's funny.
This is the planet that once used to absorb flesh in order to achieve divinity and immortality, suffocated to the flesh that it desired.
I'm loving this album. If you like those guttural frog vocals, it has plenty of those too. I anticipate this will be one of my favorite albums from this year. Don't sleep on that new Toughness album. You can get it from Gods of War Productions. The next album is the self-titled album, the debut album by Hierarchies. So here's a new band out of the US featuring two members of Surmonarat, which is a sick band on my label, and the bass player from Squassation. By the way, if you haven't heard the Squassation demo from last year, check it out. It's some of the best recent brutal death metal that you'll hear. As for Hierarchies, this is some great, atmospheric, dark death metal. There's some weird pick-scratching riffs that remind me of when Luc Lemay was playing around with that approach on the third Gorguts album. I also hear some Captain Beefheart influence in there too. I really enjoy Jared Morin's howled vocals on this as well. I find it refreshing when a band is trying to do something new, so I've been enjoying this. So much stuff just sounds the same. This definitely sounds like its own thing. The pairing of riffs and bleak, dark atmosphere, those things pair really well together. Some parts here remind me of Thanafaxith too, if you're into that black metal band. It isn't just random experimentation either. There's a structure here that makes it an accessible, tangible whole. Pick this up from Transcending Obscurity. This is another one I highly recommend checking out if you're just kind of bored with death metal lately, if it feels kind of stagnate to you as a genre. This next one's from some death metal legends, so the new EP from Massacre, Mermaid in a Manhole. Massacre are one of the earliest death metal bands dating all the way back to 1984, and this independently released EP is their latest in a string of rapid releases following the Reformation in 2019. The 3 tracks on this EP were originally meant to be included on their last full-length, Necrolution, but their label, Agonia Records, wanted the album to be shorter and punchier, so these tracks were removed from it. As a horror nerd, this EP excites me because of what the title track and album artwork refer to. Mermaid in a Manhole refers to my favorite of the Guinea Pig films. The Guinea Pig films are a series of 6 shocking, gory Japanese films, most of which have an original concept. They're some of the most notorious and controversial films ever for their realistic and graphic depictions of mutilation and torture, despite some of the films having an artful or even tongue-in-cheek tone, a very playful kind of goofy tone in some of them. They received further notoriety after the actor Charlie Sheen viewed one of the films and believed that the depictions of torture were real, and so he reported the film to authorities. In reality, the films are all fictional, and the aforementioned accusations only further demonstrated the quality of the practical effects used. Mermaid in a Manhole is a film about an artist who finds a sick mermaid, and he brings her home and places her in his bathtub. She's afflicted with a sickness, boils are covering her body, and they get worse over time. The artist then uses the pus from the boils as paint, and paints the mermaid as her condition worsens. It is a grotesque body horror film, but beautiful in its own dark way. This film has a twist that I won't spoil, but it is a profoundly dark and tragic film. The lyrics on this do nod to the twist, but the lyrics maybe don't hit with the same weight as that twist does in the film. Musically, this is 90s style meat and potatoes death, and it's exactly what you would come to expect from Massacre at this point. Terror Corps, Systems of Apocalypse. Following the disbanding of Malignant Altar in 2022, multiple members of that band went on to form the Texan death grind band Terror Corps. They independently released this, their first EP, on tape and CD this year. Drums are handled by Depraver, who I'd say is one of the greatest metal drummers ever. He previously played in Insect Warfare, Malignant Altar, Ingurgitate, Infernal Dominion, Viral Load, Warmaster, Demoniacal Genuflection, Braced for Nails, and many more, in addition to being the drummer for Oceans of Slumber. Expect death grind with a mix of guttural vocals, high screams, blasting sections, and grooves. This band just signed to Dark Descent Records, so expect a reissue of this soon if you missed the independently released version. Dripping, Archaic Scriptures of Epistemology. Dripping are one of the most celebrated experimental slam and brutal death metal bands ever. They disbanded in 2002, and most of their releases have been collector's gems since then. In 2023, they reactivated with an entirely new lineup with the exception of guitarist Sebastian Russo. This EP, available from Maggot Stomp, features the first new material from this new lineup. It includes 2 new tracks, a couple of live tracks, and an alternate mix, so really we've only got 2 new songs here clocking in at just under 6 minutes. Are they any good? Well, yeah. I'm not big on the occasional screamed vocals that are in there, but the rest of this does sound pretty cool. They could probably show some restraint on the guttural vocals too, since they're pretty much constant, and so they're not really letting the music breathe too much. There are plenty of breakdowns, pinch harmonics, and experimentation with timing. So there's some interesting stuff here, and it'll be interesting to see what they do if they eventually drop a new full length. Imperious Mortality, Eon of Ungodly Entities. The third EP and released by Denmark's Imperious Mortality is heavy, groovy brutal death with a nice sprinkling of pinch harmonics. The vocals have that great ultra-low toilet noises gurgle. There are some great tempo change parts and some nice little touches like dabbling a little bit with dissonance. Of course, there are plenty of breakdowns too, but a pretty strong release, and you can grab this from New Standard Elite. Chainsword, Chapter 12. I love the Warhammer 40,000 era of bolt thrower that peaked with 1989's Realm of Chaos. This was before Games Workshop and Warhammer were the massive powerhouse company and brands that they are today that licenses video games, television, and movies. Whereas Bolt Thrower shied away from those themes to focus more generally on war, the third album by Poland's Chainsword goes all in with the embracing of Warhammer 40k. The cover features a Chaos Space Marine champion that worships the Chaos God Khorne, and their music helps satiate the void left by Bolt Thrower's absence. It's a concept album about the Chaos God Khorne and the World Eaters. If you're a big Warhammer and Bolt Thrower nerd like me, then this album unquestionably rules. It was independently released on CD by the band in May. Torsof. Feasting on Carved Remains, and I went ahead and turned around the cover on this one just so I wouldn't have to censor it, but you can expect some gory body here on the front that is very graphic. This Finnish band have been one of the most notorious gore grind bands for their goofy, perverse lyrics and shocking album covers, including an infamous song on their debut that uses a long elephant sample from Tom Green's Freddy Got Fingered film. Following their reactivation in 2022, they released a new full-length album in 2023, which was followed by this new EP this year. This band is a blunt force instrument, so you can expect something along the lines of Mortician with live drumming and a larger emphasis on grooves and breakdowns. It's raw and ugly, and if that's what you're looking for, this caveman brutality might be for you, and you can grab this from New Standard Elite. These next 3 are available from Iron Fortress Records. Let's start with Trenchfoot, Cavernous Necrophagy. This new EP by English death metalers Trenchfoot is probably my favorite from these Iron Fortress albums. It has a nice old school sound and great barked and howled vocals. It reminds me a good amount of Trench Rot, and it's taking of influences from Asphyx and other classic bands. When new bands do throwback style death metal, this is what I want it to sound like. There are some talented musicians in this band too, including Joe Bradley that handles guitar and vocals, who previously played in Cryptic Shift, and he played alongside my maimed bandmate Tom in the band Blood Rage. Deliberalize, the allure of deceit. This is the second full length by this death metal band from Ohio. If you're looking for a band that sounds like mid to late era death, you'll love this album. A few bands have nailed Chuck Schuldin's sound as well as this band. Although the pairing of conservative ideology with progressive music feels a little peculiar, but hopefully no one is turning to death metal musicians for their political opinions anyway. I can't help but feel the band will immediately limit their exposure and growth, especially if this project ever wants to tour, but if that isn't an obstacle for you, or then this might be well worth checking out. Musically, though, it's fantastic, so if you're not going to worry about those lyrics anyway, it's still worth a jam. Depraver, Necrocryptic Obliteration. Here's the debut album from this blackened death metal band from California. I'm not a fan of a lot of reverb on the vocals, and there's a lot of that going on here, because it's that more cavernous kind of vocal approach, but coming from a more black metal kind of style. So I struggle a little bit with that. But otherwise, that raspy black metal vocal approach I think works really well here. Musically, there's a lot of classic black metal here too, but with a structure that keeps it fresh with some subtle experimentation and that good amount of death metal in there too. So it's a pretty cool release. One of my favorite dudes too, Jake Himmelfarb from Calcemia and Zealotry, plays guitar on this. Remorseless, Demo 2025. Here's the self-released demo by new brutal death metal band Remorseless. They released it in a cardboard sleeve, and they have since signed to New Standard Elite. The vocals here are handled by Nat Connor, the drummer of Architectural Genocide and former drummer in Stabbing. This is a solid 2-song demo out of Texas. The first song is pretty generic modern brutal death. It's fine, but the second song gets a little more expansive with the riffs by slowing down the tempo and letting the music breathe a little more. I think there's a lot more room for that in modern brutal death, and I hope they continue to kind of experiment and find their own sound here to differentiate themselves from a lot of the other brutal death out there. Let's end with a few slam ones. So starting with Voracious Contempt, Exquisite Suffering. I think this is my favorite of these last three. So Voracious Contempt are a new slam band named after the debut Internal Bleeding album, so that gives you some insight into what this sounds like. They throw a lot of tempo variation into their breakdowns, and it has a pretty effective mix. So the raw kind of sound and the mid-pace grooves, how breathable the album is, reminds me a lot of the early Repudiation material. More importantly, which I think is crucial for slam, it's fun to listen to. So you can grab this from Corpse Gristle. Pusboil, Indictment. The new EP from Swiss slam band Pusboil doesn't do much to differentiate it from other bands in the genre, but if you need a breakdown fix, it's a solid way to check that box. They use a multiple vocalist approach that helps keep things fresh, mixes it up a little bit. The medieval torture artwork and themes remind of Brodequin and Beelzebub, but Pusboil don't really sound like either of those bands, just to clarify. If you need to get your slam on, you can get this from Pathologically Explicit Recordings. For me, this band would be even stronger if they just work on maybe making their songwriting a little more dynamic, or maybe have some build-up or some interesting transitions that go into those breakdowns. But overall, it's okay for a slam release. So maybe the most hyped of these slam releases would be Vulvectomy's Aberrant Vaginal Gestation. After 12 years, Italy's Slam Titans Vulvectomy are back with their 4th full-length album. When it comes to Slam, I need the album to sound heavy, it needs to be fun to listen to, and the transition should help get your blood pumping when each Slam drops. This album is about what you'd expect, and it doesn't really include any surprises. It has some tempo changes, like the classic play it again, but now play it slower, but overall I'm not hearing anything that exciting or that makes me want to put this on over some of the best Slam albums out there, or even this band's earlier material. It's a solid jam for the gym, but I'd rather just listen to that Voracious Contempt album again instead. So that's it for this week. Those are my thoughts on these albums. Have you jammed them? What are your thoughts about them? You can let me know in the comments. So that's it for now. I'll see you next time.